Ma'am, I need you to step outside right now. The HOA president has filed a trespassing complaint. Those were the first words the young deputy spoke, standing stiff in his brown uniform at the bottom of my porch steps. His hand hovered near his holster while blue and red lights flickered across the pines around my lake cabin. Karen, president of the Cedar Ridge Lake Homeowners Association, stood beside him with her arms crossed, lips tight, nose tilted in that way that said she already considered herself above the lot of us. I didn't flinch. I didn't even leave my old rocking chair. I sipped my coffee, watched the lake glitter in the morning light, then met the deputy's eyes and said calm as a Georgia sunrise, "You might want to call your supervisor, or better yet, the county commissioner. This cabin's mine. In fact, this whole county line is mine." His eyebrows twitched. Karen's smirk wavered. I saw the exact second her jaw tightened and she jerked her head toward me with that angry, incredulous, "What did you just say?" expression! I didn't answer. I only smiled. Because I knew something Karen didn't, and what happened next would shake this lakeside community to its roots. But first, let me take you back to how we even got here. People like Karen don't show their claws right away. They purr, they charm, and once they've set the trap, they pounce. My name is Arthur Bennett. I'm 67, retired after 30 years in commercial land development. I spent most of my life in steel-toed boots and hard hats, building roads and parcels before half these HOA folks could spell zoning. When I bought this land nearly 25 years ago, it was raw pine and red clay hugging a quiet western Georgia lake. No cabins, no roads, nothing but sky and trees. I built the cabin with my own two hands, poured the foundation, cut the timber, carved the porch swing. I didn't just buy the cabin. I owned the soil it stood on and the acres of timber around it. Then 5 years ago, a slick developer showed up and built a gated community 3 miles up the lake. Fancy houses, private docks, winding roads, and, of course, an HOA with rules tighter than a drill sergeant's belt. At first, I didn't care. I still had peace on my side of the water, but they kept expanding. New lots, new people, and slowly, the rules crept closer. First, it was polite notices about community contributions, then permits for lake use, and 3 months ago I found a letter stuffed in my mailbox signed by Karen Langford herself. It read, in that officious tone, that my residence fell within their newly defined Cedar Ridge jurisdiction, and that I was expected to comply with their lakefront appearance standards or vacate. Structures that did not meet visual harmony. Failure would bring further action. I laughed when I read it, thinking a mail mix-up. My land had never been part of their zoning. I'd triple-checked deeds years ago. But Karen didn't care about deeds. Karen cared about control. When I ignored the letter, things escalated. Drones hovered over my dock. HOA volunteers walked their dogs too close to my property line. Citations appeared taped to my gate. Fake fines, threatening notices, even bogus warnings of forced removal. Still, I kept quiet. I didn't countersue. I minded my business. Then, Memorial Day changed everything. I'd invited my daughter, Sarah, her husband, Chris, and their boys for the weekend. Ribs on the grill, cornhole, fireflies at dusk. The boys were fishing off the dock when a black SUV barreled down the gravel driveway like it owned the place. Doors flew open and Karen and 2 of her cronies jumped out wearing Cedar Ridge vests like they were federal agents. "You're trespassing!" she barked before. "Hello. This property is under HOA review. You are in direct violation." Chris tried to speak up, but I waved him off. Calmly, I walked back to my porch, poured sweet tea, and waited. 20 minutes later. 3 sheriff cars rolled in, which brings us back to that rocking chair, the deputy, and Karen pacing like a peacock beside a lawman who had no idea whose land he stood on. I told that deputy again. "You might want to double-check your records before you do something you'll regret." Karen scoffed, ordered him to arrest me, and the deputy's radio crackled. He stepped away to speak with dispatch, and when he returned, his tone had softened. "Sir, are you Arthur Bennett?" he asked. I nodded. He blinked and said, "The records show you own over 800 acres out here, including this cabin and the land surrounding Cedar Ridge." Karen's face drained of color. That was only the first move of what I had planned. The truth was, I didn't just own the cabin. I owned large swaths of land that put me, legally, above the little kingdom Karen tried to build inside my property line. And a week earlier, I had filed papers that would rewrite her HOA rulebook papers. I hadn't bothered to tell her about, but Karen didn't give up. The very next morning, I woke to the sound of chains. She'd come back before dawn with bolt cutters and a brass padlock, locking my front gate from the outside like some petty sheriff. I watched from the window as she threaded a thick chain through iron bars while one of her minions stood by, nervous and useless. I opened the door and asked, "Karen, what do you think you're doing?" She turned with the fakest smile. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett. Per HOA Ordinance 2-2B. Your property's restricted until further notice due to non-compliance with visual codes." I stared. "There is no ordinance to be, and this is not HOA property." She rolled her eyes and said the board had voted unanimously and that my appeal window had closed. "You're in violation," she said, as if that made it so. My fists tightened. She looked pleased that she'd managed to lock a man in his own home. "Oh, you can call someone to cut it off if you can prove you're allowed to be here," she said, practically winking, and clicked away on her heels. That was when I realized she'd moved from bluster to action, and she was testing how far she could push me. I waited until she left, poured a fresh coffee, and pulled a folder from under my bookshelf. Every deed, every zoning map, every tax document for the 800 acres I'd quietly assembled over the years, including the access road that fed their private lake homes. Karen had never opened the county record. She just assumed no one would fight back. Big mistake. I made a few phone calls. First, to my attorney, Ellie Granger, who'd handled my deals since 2001. Then to Roger, my old poker buddy and the county commissioner. He was already up tending goats, but he picked up by noon. I'd filed a temporary no-access notice, blocking their road until the HOA could prove legal access across my property. I wasn't being petty. I was protecting my legacy. 2 days went by. On the third morning, Karen returned, this time with 2 private security guards in matching uniforms, striding toward my cabin like they'd been "Mr. Bennett," one of them called. "You've been served." They handed me a community sanction order that looked official but had no court stamp. Just Cedar Ridge letterhead banning me from residing in HOA-controlled territories. I laughed in their faces. "You all realize that has no legal power, right?" I asked. They shrugged. Their job was delivery, not judgment. That afternoon, Sheriff Cole Pearson stopped by a man I'd known since he bagged groceries as a teen. He read my deed, nodded, and said quietly, "You're clean, Arthur." But they won't back down. I looked across the lake at the sunset and said, "The truth is, Cole, they don't care about rules. They care about power." He nodded. "Don't give it to them." So I didn't. That night, I installed cameras along the tree line, reinforced the gates, and called the county recorder's office. I wasn't just defending my land. I was preparing to teach Karen and her clipboard cronies a lesson they'd never forget. But just as I started my quiet war, something happened that made everything worse. The next morning, a man in a dark suit showed up on my porch with a silver badge swinging from his neck. "Mr. Bennett," he said. "I'm with the Department of Environmental Enforcement. We received a report that you've been illegally draining lake water into protected wetlands." I blinked. For a second, I thought Karen had really outdone herself, turning HOA pettiness into a federal complaint. But I stood barefoot on the porch, arms folded, and stared him down like he was the rattlesnake. He introduced himself. "Agent Frank Wheeler." He said they needed to inspect the property for unauthorized drainage. "Fine," I told him. "Knock yourselves out. But don't mind if I record your inspection." I fetched my Nikon and started photographing every step they took across my untouched land. By noon, the government men had nothing to show for their trip. No pipes, no trenches, no diverted water, just oak leaves, chipmunk holes, and decades of undisturbed roots. Agent Wheeler handed me his card and promised a written report. If the complaint was false, we'll note that, he said. I nodded and told him exactly who I thought was behind it. He didn't answer, but I didn't need him to. I knew Karen had tried to bury me in paperwork. The moment the black government SUV left, I went to work. I emailed my lawyer, Ellie Granger, and ordered her to dig every environmental filing. Every permit tied to Cedar Ridge! Especially the clubhouse job. Then I called Roger, the county commissioner, and an old poker buddy who was always willing to help a friend. Ellie laughed when I mentioned going nuclear. No, I said. Surgical! People like Karen expect you to cower or yell. I planned neither. I planned to document and dismantle. A few days later, one of my camera traps near the north line flagged a fresh hole. At first, I blamed an armadillo, but the hole was too perfect to clean. I found a half-buried plastic pipe snaking towards Cedar Ridge's gated entrance. I followed it and discovered an illegal stormwater overflow running through my woods straight into a protected forestry patch. Suddenly, Agent Wheeler's visit made sense. Karen filed a fake complaint to muddy the waters while her HOA quietly broke laws upstream. I photographed everything, logged GPS coordinates, and sent the evidence to Ellie. Want me to file a cease and desist? She asked. Not yet, I told her. I wanted to watch her sweat. That night, I cleaned up, shaved, and put on a blazer I hadn't worn in years. I walked into the Cedar Ridge clubhouse meeting like a ghost chandeliers, fake guilt trim, every eye on me. Karen's jaw dropped. I stepped to the podium, laid out copies of the deed, the inspection photos, and a formal letter. Remove every pipe and drone from my land within 72 hours or I filed the first of 5 lawsuits. I didn't stay to argue. I left them with the choice. The next morning, a construction crew showed up at my gate, confused and embarrassed. Their foreman left when I handed him a copy of the deed. Karen, however, returned, furious and screaming. She called me arrogant, cursed me for embarrassing her. The usual. I let her burn out. Then I handed her a certified county notice I'd filed that morning. A toll restriction legally recorded giving me the right to charge Cedar Ridge residents $375 per vehicle to use the easement road that sits on my property. Her hand shook, reading it. You can't do that, she sputtered. I reminded her she'd locked me in my own home. Now, I was unlocking her wallet. Before she could react, a black car rolled up with tinted windows and an emblem that tightened my chest. An IRS agent stepped out, neat navy suit, no smile. Mr. Aktug Bennett, he asked. Agent Lester Clean said he was conducting a review of multiple filings tied to my land holdings. My heart dropped, not because I feared exposure, but because the arrival of an IRS agent meant someone had escalated matters to federal level. I showed him everything. Deeds, tax returns, receipts going back years. He examined each paper, then, surprised, admitted he found no inconsistencies. If everything checks out, he said, you likely won't hear from us again. Whoever filed this complaint won't want it traced back. Karen hovered nearby, desperate for a hint, but Agent Clean wouldn't even roll the window down. She had just tried to weaponize federal agencies against me, and for once, the weapons were turning inward. She turned toward me as the car pulled away. You think you are untouchable? She snapped. No, I said. I just read contracts. She was shaking now. I could see it, the unraveling, the way power slips from people who think it's glued to their palms. But even then, I wasn't expecting what she did next. Later that night, my phone rang. It was Roger, the county commissioner. His voice was tight. Arthur, we got a request for an emergency vote to redraw the HOA district lines. Let me guess, I said. Karen. He sighed. She's claiming your property was misfiled 2 years ago, that it should have fallen under HOA jurisdiction due to a clerical error. If she gets enough board support, they can challenge your deed as inaccurate. She's trying to override ownership. He didn't answer. I didn't need him to. My pulse was pounding. Roger, I said. She's making a move to take the land itself, not just the cabin. I know. I hung up and sat back in my rocking chair. I hadn't wanted to use the nuclear option, but Karen had just declared war. So I opened my laptop and sent one line to my lawyer. Ellie! Initiate the land freeze on Cedar Ridge. Effective immediately. While Karen was busy filing complaints and chaining my gate, I'd been working behind the scenes quietly, acquiring something far more powerful than lawsuits. The original mineral rights beneath Cedar Ridge 2 years ago. I bought them cheap from an old oil surveyor. That meant I could legally block any development on land until a new environmental impact study was done. An 18-month minimum delay. But before that hammer could even fall, something worse happened. The next morning, yellow tape stretched across my driveway. A sign nailed to a post read, "Condemned property pending legal dispute. No entry!" I froze. Only one office in the county had that authority. When I called Roger, his voice was panicked. "Arthur, Karen went to an emergency meeting last night. She brought fake votes, doctored images, and convinced the clerk your cabin was unsafe. He signed the order by mistake. She condemned my house," I whispered. Doppel quotes, "yes. She's trying to have it demolished within the week." My heart stopped. That cabin wasn't just wood and nails, it was my life. My wife's memory was in those walls. My grandkids' laughter echoed through the porch beams. And now, she wanted to bulldoze it. Something inside me broke. No more silence. No more patience. That night, I walked into the town hall meeting uninvited and dropped a 94-page evidence packet right onto the podium. The crowd gasped. Karen froze in her seat. "Good evening," I said into the mic. "This is a notarized record of every false claim, forged votes, illegal incursion, and fake complaint made by Cedar Ridge HOA against me and others this year." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen tried to shout me down, but I wasn't alone. My lawyer, Ellie, stood beside me. Roger, the commissioner, flanked her with a signed statement. Behind them, 3 HOA members who'd once supported Karen stepped forward to testify, each one describing her abuse of power. Mrs. Porter trembled as she spoke. "She'll fine me for a flower pot shaped like a chicken," another said. "She threatened to report me for trespassing on my own lakefront." The mayor stood and turned to Karen. "Why did you condemn this man's cabin without proof? Why did you falsify federal reports?" Karen stammered. "This is a personal vendetta," and that's when I dropped the final hammer. I opened a folder filled with signed deeds, easements, and mineral claims. "Effective this morning," I said. "I've filed a temporary freeze on all property transactions within Cedar Ridge HOA. No buying, no selling, no construction, until an investigation is complete." The mayor nodded. He can. The crowd erupted gasps, applause, chaos. Karen stormed out, but her story didn't end there. 2 nights later, at 3:12 a.m., I woke to a loud bang. Flames were climbing up my gate, the same one Karen had padlocked weeks ago. The fire roared against the trees. Gasoline thick in the air. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. But Karen didn't know my grandson had installed wildlife cameras all over the property. Motion triggered, recording everything, including the car, the license plate, the figure pouring gasoline. I called 911 and waited. The fire burned for 20 minutes before the fire trucks arrived. Sheriff Cole came next. He sniffed the air and said, intentional, "Diesel mix. This wasn't no accident." I handed him a USB drive. "Footage," I said. He nodded. "If it's who I think it is." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Karen Langford had gone too far. The next day, a man named Walter, one of her own board members, showed up with his daughter. He looked ashamed. "I voted for her once," he said, "but not for this. Not burning gates. Not fake reports." He handed me an envelope, a sworn statement exposing Karen's secret emails with a county clerk. Proof of a corruption. Within days, 5 board members resigned. The HOA collapsed from the inside. And then the sheriff called. Arthur! It's confirmed. The car belongs to Karen's cousin. She was seen with him the night of the fire. We're seizing her records today! By noon, officers surrounded her house. Karen came out screaming, waving papers, claiming it was all a setup. No one believed her. The next week, a letter arrived, her handwriting. You don't know what you've done, it said. You've destroyed this community. 2 days later, another letter arrived from the county. The HOA charter was revoked. Effective immediately. Cedar Ridge no longer existed. It was over. But Karen still wasn't done. She sued me. A last desperate move. Then, a phone call changed everything. It was Senator Marcus Hale, an old client and friend. Arthur, he said, we're drafting a new landowner protection bill. I want your story to lead the hearing. Weeks later, I stood before the state senate. My story aired across 3 states. They passed the bill, the Bennett Landowner Protection Act. Karen lost her home, a title, her power. But I didn't celebrate her fall, I celebrated the lesson. Power isn't in the rules you invent. It's in the truth you protect. So if you ever find yourself near Tall Pine County and you see an old man rocking on a porch by the lake, stop by. I'll pour you some sweet tea and tell you how Karen lost the county she thought she owned. Because out here, kindness is strength. But never mistake silence for surrender.